The cold in the bank didn't just come from the air conditioning. It came from her eyes, from the looks that cut through without saying a word, that measured the girl's every step with an invisible ruler made of prejudice. She entered carefully, almost asking permission from the floor, as if she knew her presence was bothersome. Her worn sandals dragged over the smooth floor, making a low, almost sad sound. There was no makeup on her face, no sweet perfume on her wrists. There was sweat on the corner of her forehead and a tight silence in her eyes. She held a folded piece of paper in both hands. It was more than a receipt. It was a request, a reminder that she also had the right to be there. The bank was large, polished, impersonal. The electronic signs glowed impatiently in red. Plastic chairs were arranged as if everyone who sat in them had the same story. But she wasn't the same, and everyone seemed to notice. An old man adjusted his briefcase as she passed. A woman lowered her voice on the phone. The security guard, leaning near the door, straightened up. She just wanted to sit down, wait her turn, withdraw what little she had. But the judgment came before the number, before the speech, before the gesture. It was as if her skin, her manner, her simple clothes had already told a story that no one wanted to hear. She sat down carefully, hiding the tear in her skirt with a quick movement of her hands. She looked at the floor, then at the screen that showed the numbers that spun like a game she never won. Sweat began to run down the back of her neck, not from the heat, but from the invisible weight of suspicion, the kind of weight that many carry and few see, a weight made of memories, of the day she was barred from the store, of the teacher who ignored her, of the interview in which they only asked if she could write. All of that came back when she entered that bank. Each memory was a scar hidden under her skin, throbbing with each new glance. Her password had not yet been called, but her heart was already racing. She remembered the day she had received that money, sewing until late at night, her fingers bleeding in silence. She remembered the rice that was missing at home, her younger brother's notebook without a cover, the bills piled up in the drawer. That money was sacred, not because it was a lot, but because it had been earned with sacrifice. She looked at the paper again. It was more than a number. It was the sum of her efforts, the symbol of her struggle not to sink. It was hope folded into 4 parts. The panel beeped. Her number appeared. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked the cashier with small steps. She knew that every movement would be watched, every word weighed, every expression interpreted, and yet it was, because what sustained her was not the certainty of justice. It was the need to move on. She reached the counter and held out the paper with trembling hands. The clerk barely looked at her. He took the paper as if he were picking up an empty envelope. The air conditioning was still freezing, the stairs even colder, and there, standing vulnerable, she only expected to be treated with the bare minimum of humanity. But even that would not be given to her without a fight. And what would come next, she would never forget. The paper slipped from her hands as if fate itself had decided to expose its fragility. It hit the clean floor of the bank and slid a few centimeters until it stopped near the feet of an employee who was watching everything with a level of attention that had not existed before. She immediately ducked, as if she wanted to prevent that small accident from attracting attention. But it was too late. Embarrassment does not need a loud sound. The snap of an unexpected gesture is enough to make everyone's eyes turn suspiciously. And that's what happened. The employee frowned, took a step forward, looked around, and said, in a voice loud enough to hurt, "I saw something strange when she ducked. She had something." The sentence echoed. It wasn't just an accusation. It was a sentence. Before she could even stand up, people were already leaning in to get a better look, whispering to each other. She, still crouched, looked up, confused, trying to understand what exactly they were saying. Her hands were empty. Her gaze was clear. But here, that wasn't enough. She tried to hide something, another voice repeated, reinforcing the chorus of judgment. The atmosphere in the bank changed. The air seemed denser. The sound of the numbers on the panel disappeared. All that was left was the tension floating between the chairs and table. She tried to explain herself, but her voice didn't come out. Only a weak sound, interrupted by the anguish of not being heard. Someone stared at her with raised eyebrows, as if demanding answers. But answers aren't enough when someone has already decided who is to blame. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She showed the palms of her hands. She pointed to the grubby bag hanging over her shoulder. "I didn't take anything," she managed to say, but her voice was lost amid the reactions that were already multiplying. One of the security guards approached. His gaze didn't ask, it stated. She turned to him, but the ground seemed to sink beneath her feet. Someone suggested that she be searched. Another person asked that her bag be opened right there. She hesitated, not out of fear of what they would find, but out of pain at being treated like a thief in front of strangers. The bag was small, with a worn clasp, and inside were only an old notebook, a broken comb, a handkerchief, and a small bag with coins. But that didn't matter. What was on trial here was not the contents of the bag, but the contents of her appearance. She knew that, and knowing that was what hurt the most. She knew that for them, the simple fact of being there, poor, simple, uncomfortable, was enough to make her a suspect. And at that moment, even without evidence, even without any sign of crime, what fell to the floor along with that paper was something much greater, her dignity. And no one, absolutely no one, bent down to help her get up. She raised her teary eyes, as if she still believed that the truth, told sincerely, could clear any doubt. She slowly opened her arms, showing her pockets turned out, her hands open, her entire body devoted to the search for justice. But there, in that cold and hurried room, no one wanted to listen. What spoke loudest was fear disguised as authority, prejudice dressed as procedure, and the silence she broke with her own voice only served to increase the indifference. "I didn't take anything," she repeated. But the sentence fell to the floor like a dry leaf. No one bent down to hear. A tall man in a dark suit and neat tie approached. The manager. He walked with a mixture of haste and impatience, as if he had already decided to put an end to the situation. Without greeting, without empathy, he simply glanced at the young woman and said in a technical tone, "Authorize the bag check." His words came as a final sentence. The security guard nodded. The young woman took a step back, clutching her bag to her chest as if, at least in that old object, there was still some shred of dignity. But there was no choice. This was no longer a request. It was an imposition. She opened her purse, slowly. Inside, she revealed poverty without crime. A comb with broken teeth, a handkerchief already worn from use, the notebook with a crumpled cover where she carefully wrote down her expenses, like someone who manages miracles with precision. And, at the bottom, a few coins wrapped in plastic. Nothing more. The security guard rummaged through it disdainfully, like someone rummaging through something dirty. The manager watched from afar, already preparing an excuse for the collective embarrassment. All around, the eyes of the customers were heavy as stones. No one apologized. No one took back what they had said. The truth brought no comfort. It only brought more silence. She cried, but it was a restrained, proud cry, like someone who doesn't want to give the world the taste of complete humiliation. The tears fell without sobs. They fell to the cold floor like confessions that would never be taken into account. Her hands shook, but her feet remained steady. There was something in the way she held her body that said, "I've been accused before. I've been discredited before. But I haven't stopped being who I am." And yet, at that moment, something inside her broke. It wasn't pride. It was the hope that one day being poor wouldn't be a reason to be treated like a criminal. And even with her purse already open, her innocence proven, her face washed with tears, and her soul drained of strength, no one reached out. Not the manager, not the security guard, not those who watched. Because the cruelest thing was not the suspicion. It was the lack of interest, the complete lack of listening. And when she fell silent again, it was not because she had nothing to say. It was because she understood, with the pain of someone who matures by force, that there are places where the voice of a poor woman will never be heard, even when she tells the purest truth. The atmosphere was still charged, as if the air inside had become too thick to breathe. The young woman remained still, her eyes lowered, trying to control the trembling in her hands. The humiliation, still fresh, weighed on her shoulders like a stone. The manager was adjusting his tie. The security guard was walking away as if finishing an uncomfortable task, and the curious glances were beginning to disperse. It was just another normal day at the bank, except for that scene. A scene that, for them, would soon be forgotten. But then, the glass door opened. The sound of heels was the first thing everyone heard. A firm, slow sound that crossed the room with authority, without needing to announce anything. The customers looked back. The manager turned around slowly. The security guard by the entrance hesitated. A woman entered, elegant, proud, with a posture that made the floor seem more worthy of being stepped on. The dark, well-cut dress highlighted a presence that needed no introduction. But it wasn't the clothes, nor the perfectly tied hair. It was the look, a look that pierced walls and silences. She walked to the center of the room, unhurriedly, She observed everything with the eyes of someone who had seen the worst and learned to recognize contempt even when it was hidden in smiles. Her daughter, still standing, seemed in disbelief. Her body took a slight step back, as if she didn't understand what she was seeing. But before she could say anything, the woman stood in front of her, raised her hand slightly and said, in a low but firm voice like contained thunder, "Let go of my daughter." It wasn't a request, not a shout. It was an order that made the air go silent. The manager tried to say something, but the words died in his throat. The security guard took a step back. Everyone present, now attentive, watched the scene as if they were watching something sacred happen. The woman placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder with a calm, intimate, and at the same time immensely powerful gesture. And in that moment, there was no longer poor or rich, accused or client. There was only the truth, shining like a ray of lightning between dark clouds. Because dignity, when restored with love, has a sound that silences even shame. And it was this sound that invaded the bank that morning. The sound of a presence that did not need to explain itself. That simply was. That simply existed. And by existing, it changed everything. Their eyes searched for explanations like hands groping in the dark. The contrast was brutal. The young woman, her simple clothes still damp with sweat and shame, next to that woman with impeccable presence, who seemed to have come from a world that does not mix with the dusty ground of poverty. There was uneasiness on their faces, murmurs, hypotheses. Could she be a boss? Someone whispered. A lawyer? Another ventured. But she did not respond to the speculation. She simply looked around with a serenity that imposed silence. It was a kind of serenity that cannot be bought. It is built with pain, with choices, with history. The daughter, still speechless, had tears in her eyes. What she was feeling was not just surprise. It was something deeper, harder to name. It was a reunion with a part of herself that she believed had been left behind. The woman turned slowly to the manager. The man, no longer in the confidence of his well-pressed suit, tried to maintain his posture. But his words slipped. You need to understand, it was a misunderstanding, a momentary mistake. She did not interrupt him right away. She let him stumble over his own attempts at explanation, and then she spoke. A misunderstanding, she said, her voice calm, is confusing appearance with character. It is forgetting that pain also has heirs. She stepped forward. You judged my daughter before you heard her voice, before you knew what separates power from origin, before you wondered why she came here with more fear than guilt. The woman's eyes didn't waver. Her tone didn't accuse. But each sentence was a mirror, and those present were beginning to see not only the young woman, but themselves. The woman turned back to her daughter. She ran a hand down her face, wiping away a tear. You no longer need to apologize for where you came from, because the world tried to shame you, but it failed, not you. The young woman pressed her lips together, holding back tears. At that moment, a bond was being remade. A bond that had perhaps been broken by past decisions, but that now pulsed with the strength of an old love, unspoken but alive. A love that never ceased to exist. It just remained silent, waiting for the right moment to reappear. And there, between the walls of that bench, where everything seemed cold, something warm, human, unexpected began to be born. Because when a mother claims her daughter before the world, she is not only protecting her, she is healing time. She is saying with her soul, she belongs to me, and no look can tear that away from us. The manager tried to control himself once more. His restless fingers fiddled with a button on his jacket sleeve, as if his well-tailored suit could still save him from the situation. But at that moment, his attire lost its power, because there are times when the truth tears fabrics and deconstructs status. And what was seen now was no longer a manager. It was a man trying to hide his own cowardice behind pretty words. It was just a mistake, madam. Nothing serious. A passing confusion. You understand how protocols work, he said, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The woman silently took a small rectangular box out of her purse pocket. It was a pen drive. She walked to the nearest table, connected it to the attendant's computer, and asked to project the images from the security camera. No one moved. The entire bank seemed to have stopped breathing. On the screen, the minutes were rewinding. The scenes unfolded like a theater without masks. There was a young woman entering, sitting down, waiting. There she was handing over the paper, bending down to pick it up. And there, clear as day, was the exact moment when a man in a suit, while everyone was looking at her, dropped something near where she was, disguisedly, as if carefully planting guilt. The woman said, pointing to the screen. He was the one who threw the object, and he was the one who left right after, without being questioned, without being touched. The silence turned into embarrassment. The security guard lowered his eyes. The attendant tried to minimize the impact with a murmur that no one understood. The manager, blushing, tried to stammer something, but dignity only returns halfway. And at that moment, no words would be enough, because the image spoke louder. The image screamed. The woman walked up to the manager and stopped in front of him. Not a misunderstanding. Cowardice. What you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to humiliate a young woman because it was easier than questioning a man in a suit. The words came slowly, but they cut like a sharp knife. You chose haste over justice, comfort over truth. And now you'll have to face your own inaction. She didn't need to raise her voice, because when you're right, a calm tone is more devastating than any scream. The young woman, still next to her mother, watched everything with open eyes, like someone who sees, for the first time, light coming through a window that had always been locked. There, for the first time that day, she felt no fear. She felt firm. She felt seen, finally, not because she was accused, but because she was defended, because she was loved, because she was who she was, without having to hide. And in front of all those who judged her, the truth not only freed her, it exposed them, because on that bench, where appearance had so often been stronger than essence, now it was a truth that occupied the center of the room, and there was no uniform, suit, or excuse that could hide from her. After the images stopped and the silence became unbearable even for the most insensitive, the woman approached her daughter and, as if opening an old book in front of a forgotten audience, began to tell her what no one there knew. Her voice was low but firm, and each word seemed to open a crack in hearts that had previously been closed. She dresses like this not for lack of choice, but out of respect for the pain she carries. For years, my daughter cried in secret, taking care of her siblings while I couldn't be around. All eyes turned to the young woman. That previously ignored figure took on deeper, almost sacred contours. Her father died when she was still a girl. An accident with no goodbyes, no chance for explanations. Since then, she grew up faster than she should have. She dropped out of school to sell bread, washed strangers' clothes while her classmates wrote essays about the future. Every button sewn, every blouse washed, every coin saved, everything was to ensure that her siblings had what she didn't have, time to dream. The manager, who had previously held her chin high, now looked at the floor. The manager was no longer the center of attention, nor the security guard, nor the murmurers in the lines. It was her, the girl who didn't scream, who didn't fight back, who bore the weight of contempt with the shoulders of someone who had already carried more. She didn't dress badly, her mother repeated. She dressed in resistance. She dressed in the scraps of life that you never wanted to see. A sob escaped a woman in the background. Another man wiped his eyes surreptitiously, because at that moment, what was being broken, there was not just the silence. It was an invisible wall between worlds that avoid each other. The woman continued. When she came here, she asked for nothing more than what was rightfully hers. She did not come to cause trouble. She did not come to steal. She came to uphold dignity, even when everything was against her. And what she got in return was suspicion. It was finger-pointing. It was shame. The words echoed like a distant drum. They were slow, steady, ancient beats, as if her ancestry spoke through her, reminding those present that the story of poverty was never a sign of dishonor, but often of heroism. The young woman remained motionless, but something was moving inside. It was as if her soul, which had been shrunken for so many years, was gaining space. For the first time, she didn't have to shrink to fit in. For the first time, the world around her seemed to recognize that what she had experienced was not invisible, not disposable. It was worthy of being told, remembered, respected. And the bench, that scene of humiliation, began to transform itself in the face of her mother's words, not in another place, but in another time, a time when the truth, when spoken with courage, could still teach something. It could still heal. It could still redeem. They walked away from the bench slowly, without haste, like someone crossing a battlefield after the end of a war. Mother and daughter side by side, but not like before. Now, there was a silence between them that was not the absence of words. It was the presence of everything that had never been said. The young woman's feet still hurt, not from the sandals, but from the weight they had carried on that floor. And yet, she walked steadily. Her face was clean. The tears had dried, but emotion still overflowed in her eyes. There was something new about her, something that others could not name, but that was visible. It was dignity being rebuilt. On the sidewalk, a man who'd been watching everything from a distance approached. He was one of the bank customers, wearing a suit, his tie already crooked from the nervousness of the last few minutes. He held out a large, folded note, as if he wanted to make up for collective embarrassment with an individual gesture. "Here, young lady, so you can buy something or help your brothers." The gesture seemed noble. The intention, perhaps, was good. But she looked at the note as if she were looking at a past that is no longer useful. She smiled. That smile that does not mock, does not accuse, but also does not accept alms. "Thank you, sir. But today I already earned what I needed." And she squeezed her mother's hand tighter. The man stepped back, not understanding. But he didn't need to understand, because it wasn't about him. It was about her, about what she had achieved there, not with shouting, not with hatred, but with truth and courage, and that cannot be bought, exchanged, or measured in money, that is stored in the soul. Other people looked at her differently now. Some wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed of what they had done or failed to do. But she didn't demand an apology. She didn't expect recognition. Her forgiveness wasn't a coin. It was a silent choice, made by someone who decided to move on without carrying the weight of what they didn't deserve. They stopped for a moment before turning the corner. The mother let out a long sigh. "You've grown more than I imagined." The daughter didn't respond with words. She just rested her head on her shoulder, like when she was little and sought shelter from the world. But now it wasn't shelter. It was a reunion. It was complicity. It was a beginning of something new between them. Something that didn't erase the past, but made it bearable. And as they walked from there, each step was an affirmation that the humiliated girl no longer needed to defend herself. She herself was her own honor restored, not because she had defeated others, but because she had overcome forgetting herself. When they turned the corner and left the bench behind, the young woman felt something strange. It wasn't relief, nor was it anger. It was a new weight, different from the one she had arrived with, a weight that didn't hurt, but that required a pause. It was as if the soul, after years of being shrunken, needed space to stretch out. She stopped. So did her mother. Ahead, the street continued like all the others, with its potholes and its haste. But something about that corner called for a moment, a gesture, a closure. She looked around and saw a thin, twisted tree that resisted between the sidewalk and the rusty fence of a vacant lot. Its leaves were few, its branches crooked, but was there, firm, as if defying the asphalt. She walked towards it. She took the remaining coin from the bag out of her pocket. It was the oldest, marked by time and memory. The same coin she had held in her little fingers when her father taught her to count change. The same one she had saved during the days of hunger, not for its financial value, but for its original value. It was all that was left of an interrupted childhood. She knelt at the foot of the tree. The cement around it was cracked and dry, and yet she made room with her fingertips. Her short nails scratched the ground, but she didn't stop. The gesture was calm, almost ceremonial. She buried the coin there carefully, then she covered it with earth, pressing it lightly with the palm of her hand. "Here," she murmured, "is where I leave what they tried to steal from me, the right to rise with honor." Her mother didn't come closer. She remained silent, respecting the distance that the ritual required. It was a moment for her alone. When she stood up, the young woman did not cry, but she did not smile either. Her face was firm, serene, as if she had just finished a cycle. She ran her hands over her knees, dusting them off with dignity, and then she looked at the tree once more. "You were also ignored," she thought, "but you did not give up on growing." That was what she now understood. Some roots only flourish in hard soil, and it is in oblivion, in neglect, in the mud, that the lotus opens its petals with more courage. She walked up to her mother, who simply extended her hand. And in that touch, there were no questions. There was acceptance. The two of them walked down the street. And although the world hadn't changed color, nor had the buildings become more beautiful, something was different. The young woman walked with her body held high, but her soul even higher, because now she knew what they said about her was never who she was. And the judgment of others, however cruel, could not bury what was blossoming inside her. That day, she didn't ask for justice. She didn't demand revenge. She didn't need an apology. All she wanted was the right to never be silenced again. And when she buried that coin, she left there not just a symbol, but a seed, a promise to herself, to never again shrink her light, to fit in with the fear of others, because a flower that grows from the mud carries the rarest beauty. And she now was that flower. Whole, unbroken, unpostponable. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to receive more profound stories like this one that restore faith, dignity, and purpose. Leave a like if this narrative moved you. Comment below what this young woman reminded you of in your own journey, and share it with someone who needs to find hope again, because stories like this deserve to be told and multiplied.